When dealing with electrical inspections, especially with an inspector who has a reputation for being nitpicky, it's crucial to approach the situation strategically and professionally. Firstly, maintaining a professional and respectful demeanor is paramount. Even if you disagree with the inspector's interpretations, maintain a polite and cooperative attitude. Listen carefully to their findings and ask clarifying questions to ensure you fully understand their reasoning. Secondly, a thorough understanding of the applicable codes and standards is essential. Review the relevant sections of the National Electrical Code, or NEC, and any local amendments to ensure your work meets all requirements. Be prepared to explain the rationale behind your installations and design choices, citing specific code references when necessary. Thirdly, address nitpicks appropriately. For minor issues that you believe are within acceptable tolerances or interpretations of the code, explain your perspective respectfully. Present your reasoning clearly and concisely, referencing relevant code sections or industry best practices. If the inspector insists on a specific interpretation that you disagree with, politely request a written justification for their decision. This documentation can be valuable if you need to escalate the issue later. Fourthly, document all interactions with the inspector meticulously. Keep a detailed record of all inspections, including the date, time, inspector's name, and a summary of their findings. Note any discussions that took place, including the specific issues raised and any agreements reached. Obtain any written documentation from the inspector, such as rejection notices or written justifications for their decisions. Fifthly, if you believe the inspector's nitpicking is excessive or unreasonable, consider escalating your concerns to the chief inspector or other higher level authority within the electrical inspections department. Before escalating, gather all relevant documentation to support your claim, including copies of the permit, inspection reports, code references, and any written communication with the inspector. Present your case clearly and professionally, focusing on the specific instances of nitpicking and explaining why you believe they are unwarranted. To address the specific situation with the small-time general contractor, or GC, firstly review the building permit carefully. Examine the permit description to fully understand the specific scope of work that is allowed. Pay close attention to any limitations or restrictions that may be specified. Secondly, confirm the details with the GC. Contact the GC to verify the exact nature of the interior remodel and to determine whether any structural work is involved. Clarify the GC understanding of the permit requirements and any specific instructions they may have received from the building department. Thirdly, schedule an appointment with the inspector. Contact the inspector to schedule a meeting to discuss the requirements for hardwiring smoke detectors and any other potential issues related to the project. Prepare a list of specific questions you have regarding the code requirements and the inspector's expectations. Fourthly, document the discussion. Take detailed notes during the meeting with the inspector, recording their instructions, explanations, and any agreements that are reached. Obtain written confirmation of any specific requirements or interpretations that deviate from the standard code. Remember that effective communication, thorough documentation, and a solid understanding of the electrical code are your best defenses against nitpicky inspections. Remain professional, be prepared to justify your work, and don't hesitate to escalate concerns if necessary to ensure a fair and reasonable outcome. Electrical inspections are essential for ensuring safety and code compliance in electrical installation. However, dealing with inspectors who have a reputation for being overly meticulous can be challenging. Here's a guide to help you navigate these situations effectively. Firstly, preparation is key. Before the inspection, thoroughly review the project's electrical plans and specifications. Ensure that all work complies with the latest edition of the National Electrical Code, or NEC, and any local amendments. Double-check all wiring connections, grounding, and bonding to ensure they meet code requirements. Secondly, documentation is crucial. Keep accurate records of all materials used, including those specifications and certifications. Maintain detailed documentation of all work performed, including any deviations from the original plans. This documentation can be helpful in addressing any questions or concerns raised by the inspector. Thirdly, communication is essential. When the inspector arrives, greet them politely and professionally. Be prepared to answer their questions clearly and concisely. If you disagree with the inspector's findings, respectfully explain your reasoning, citing relevant code sections or industry standards. Fourthly, addressing nitpicks appropriately. If the inspector identifies minor issues that you believe are within acceptable tolerances, explain your perspective respectfully. Provide supporting documentation or evidence to demonstrate that the work meets code requirements. If the inspector insists on a specific interpretation that you disagree with, politely request a written justification for their decision. Fifthly, documentation and record keeping. Keep a detailed record of all inspections, including the inspector's findings and any discussions that took place. Obtain any written documentation from the inspector, such as rejection notices or written justifications. This documentation can be valuable if you need to escalate the issue later. Sixthly, knowing when to escalate. If you believe the inspector's nitpicking is excessive or unreasonable, consider escalating your concerns to the chief inspector or other higher level authority within the electrical inspections department. Before escalating, gather all relevant documentation to support your claim, including copies of the permit, inspection reports, code references, and any written communication with the inspector. Present your case clearly and professionally, focusing on the specific instances of nitpicking and explaining why you believe they are unwarranted. Here's a deeper dive into specific aspects. Firstly, understanding the NEC. The National Electrical Code, or NEC, is a comprehensive set of standards for safe electrical installations. It covers a wide range of topics, including wiring methods, overcurrent protection, grounding, and equipment installation. Familiarize yourself with the specific sections of the NEC that apply to your project. Be prepared to cite relevant code sections to support your work. Secondly, common NEC violations. Some common NEC violations that inspectors often look for include improper grounding, inadequate overcurrent protection, incorrect wiring methods, and improper installation of electrical equipment. Pay close attention to these areas to minimize the likelihood of inspection failures. Thirdly, handling grounding and bonding issues. Grounding and bonding are critical for electrical safety. Ensure that all grounding and bonding connections are properly made and that they comply with NEC requirements. Pay particular attention to grounding electrode systems, equipment grounding conductors, and bonding of metal enclosures. Fourthly, addressing overcurrent protection. Overcurrent protection devices, such as circuit breakers and fuses, are designed to protect electrical circuits from overloads and short circuits. Ensure that all overcurrent protection devices are properly sized and installed in accordance with NEC requirements. Fifthly, wiring methods. The NEC specifies various wiring methods that are permitted for different applications. Ensure that you are using the correct wiring method for your project and that all wiring is installed in accordance with code requirements. Pay attention to conductor sizing, conduit fill, and support requirements. Sixthly, equipment installation. Electrical equipment, such as receptacles, switches, and lighting fixtures, must be installed in accordance with NEC requirements. Ensure that all equipment is properly grounded, supported, and protected from physical damage. Seventhly, documentation. Maintain accurate records of all electrical work performed, including wiring diagrams, equipment specifications, and inspection reports. This documentation can be helpful in troubleshooting problems and demonstrating compliance with code requirements. Eighthly, communication with the inspector. When the inspector arrives, be prepared to answer their questions clearly and concisely. If you disagree with the inspector's findings, respectfully explain your reasoning, citing relevant code sections or industry standards. Ninthly, addressing nitpicks. If the inspector identifies minor issues that you believe are within acceptable tolerances, explain your perspective respectfully. Provide supporting documentation or evidence to demonstrate that the work meets code requirements. Tenthly, knowing when to escalate. If you believe the inspector's nitpicking is excessive or unreasonable, consider escalating your concerns to the chief inspector or other higher level authority within the electrical inspections department. Before escalating, Gather all relevant documentation to support your claim, including copies of the permit, inspection reports, code references, and any written communication with the inspector. Present your case clearly and professionally, focusing on the specific instances of nitpicking and explaining why you believe they are unwarranted. In addition to these general guidelines, here are some specific tips for dealing with nitpicky inspectors. Firstly, be prepared for scrutiny. Nitpicky inspectors are likely to scrutinize every detail of your work. Be prepared to defend your work and provide supporting documentation to demonstrate compliance with code requirements. Secondly, maintain a positive attitude. Even if you disagree with the inspector's findings, maintain a positive attitude and avoid getting into arguments. Remember that the inspector is ultimately responsible for ensuring the safety of the electrical installation. Thirdly, document everything. Keep a detailed record of all interactions with the inspector, including the date, time, and a summary of the discussion. This documentation can be helpful if you need to escalate the issue later. Fourthly, know your rights. You have the right to appeal the inspector's decision if you believe it is unfair or unreasonable. Consult with your local building department or electrical licensing board to learn about the appeals process. Fifthly, seek advice from others. If you are unsure about how to handle a nitpicky inspector, seek advice from other electricians or contractors who have experience dealing with them. They may be able to provide valuable insights and strategies. In conclusion, dealing with nitpicky electrical inspectors can be challenging, but it is not impossible. By following these guidelines, you can increase your chances of a successful inspection and avoid unnecessary delays and expenses. Remember to be prepared, maintain a positive attitude, and know your rights. The ultimate goal is to ensure the safety and compliance of the electrical installation. Let's consider some hypothetical scenarios. Scenario 1 involves a disagreement on conduit fill. An inspector might argue that the conduit is overfilled, even though calculations show it's within NEC limits. In this case, present your calculations clearly, showing the conductor sizes, conduit type, and fill percentage. If the inspector still disagrees, request a written explanation citing the specific code section they believe is violated. Scenario 2, a dispute over grounding and bonding. An inspector might question the adequacy of the grounding electrode system. Provide documentation showing the grounding electrode resistance and the calculations used to determine the size of the grounding electrode conductor. If the inspector remains unconvinced, consider having a qualified engineer or third-party inspector evaluate the grounding system. Scenario 3 revolves around wiring methods. An inspector might object to the use of a particular wiring method in a specific application. Present documentation showing that the wiring method is permitted by the NEC for that application. If the inspector disagrees, request a written explanation citing the specific code section they believe is violated. Remember, the key to success in these situations is preparation, documentation, and communication. By being prepared to defend your work and by maintaining a positive attitude, you can increase your chances of a successful inspection. Effective communication with the electrical inspector is crucial for resolving any issues that may arise during an inspection. Here are some tips for communicating effectively. Firstly, be professional and respectful. Always treat the inspector with courtesy and respect, even if you disagree with their findings. Avoid getting into arguments or becoming defensive. Secondly, listen carefully. Pay close attention to the inspector's concerns and ask clarifying questions to ensure you understand their perspective. Take notes of the issues they raise and the reasons for their concerns. Thirdly, explain your reasoning clearly. When explaining your perspective, use clear and concise language. Avoid technical jargon that the inspector may not understand. Cite specific code sections or industry standards to support your arguments. Fourthly, provide documentation. If you have documentation that supports your work, such as wiring diagrams, equipment specifications, or inspection reports provided to the inspector, this documentation can help to clarify any misunderstandings and demonstrate compliance with code requirements. Fifthly, be willing to compromise. In some cases, it may be necessary to compromise to resolve a disagreement with the inspector. Be willing to consider alternative solutions that meet the inspector's concerns while still achieving your objectives. Sixthly, follow up in writing. After the inspection, follow up with the inspector in writing to confirm any agreements that were reached. This written confirmation can help to avoid misunderstandings and ensure that the issues are resolved to your satisfaction. In addition to these general tips, here are some specific strategies for communicating with nitpicky inspectors. Firstly, anticipate their concerns. Before the inspection, try to anticipate the inspector's concerns and prepare documentation to address them. This proactive approach can help to avoid potential conflicts. Secondly, be patient. Nitpicky inspectors may take longer to complete their inspections and may ask more questions than other inspectors. Be patient and allow them the time they need to do their job. Thirdly, focus on the facts. When discussing issues with the inspector, focus on the facts and avoid getting emotional. Present your arguments in a calm and rational manner. Fourthly, seek clarification. If you are unsure about something the inspector says, ask for clarification. It is better to ask questions than to make assumptions that could lead to misunderstandings. Fifthly, document everything. Keep a detailed record of all communications with the inspector, including the date, time, and a summary of the discussion. This documentation can be helpful if you need to escalate the issue later. Remember that effective communication is a two-way street. By listening carefully, explaining your reasoning clearly, and being willing to compromise, you can increase your chances of a successful inspection and avoid unnecessary conflicts. Now let's delve deeper into understanding building permits, particularly in the context of electrical work and inspections. Building permits are official documents issued by local government agencies that authorize construction or renovation projects. They ensure that projects comply with building codes, zoning regulations, and other applicable laws. Understanding the scope and requirements of a building permit is crucial for avoiding delays, fines, and other complications. Here's a breakdown of key aspects. Firstly, types of building permits. There are various types of building permits depending on the nature and scope of the project. Common types include electrical permits, plumbing permits, mechanical permits, and general building permits. Each type of permit covers specific aspects of the construction process. Secondly, scope of work. The building permit specifies the scope of work that is allowed under the permit. This may include new construction, renovations, alterations, or repairs. It is important to carefully review the permit to ensure that the work you are performing is within the scope of the permit. Thirdly, code compliance. The building permit requires that the work comply with all applicable building codes, including the National Electrical Code, or NEC, and any local amendments. It is your responsibility to ensure that your work meets these code requirements. Fourthly, inspections. The building permit typically requires inspections at various stages of the construction process. These inspections are conducted by local government inspectors to ensure that the work is being performed in accordance with the permit and applicable codes. Fifthly, fees. Building permits typically require the payment of fees. These fees are used to cover the cost of administering the permit process and conducting inspections. Sixthly, expiration. Building permits typically have an expiration date. If the work is not completed by the expiration date, you may need to renew the permit. Seventhly, penalties. Performing work without a building permit or violating the terms of a building permit can result in penalties such as fines or stop work orders. Eighthly, reviewing the permit. Before starting any work, carefully review the building permit to understand the scope of work, code requirements, inspection schedule, and other important information. Ninthly, consulting with the building department. If you have any questions about the building permit or the permit process, consult with your local building department. They can provide guidance and clarification to help you avoid problems. Tenthly, keeping the permit on site. Keep a copy of the building permit on site during the construction process. This will allow you to readily provide it to inspectors if requested. In a specific situation with a small-time GC and the interior remodel only, frame rect, hardwire smoke detector rect, existing permit, several points are critical. Firstly, Understanding the limitations. The permit clearly states interior remodel only. This limits the scope of work to the interior of the building and excludes any exterior modifications or structural changes beyond what's explicitly allowed for framing. Secondly, framing requirement. The phrase frame rect indicates that some framing work is necessary. Determine the extent of the framing required by consulting with the GC and reviewing any available plans. Ensure that the framing work complies with all applicable building codes. Thirdly, hardwired smoke detectors. The permit specifically requires hardwired smoke detectors. This means that the smoke detectors must be connected to the building's electrical system and must have a battery backup. Ensure that the smoke detectors are installed in accordance with NEC requirements and local regulations. Fourthly, OC existing. The abbreviation OC existing likely refers to the existing overcurrent protection, such as circuit breakers or fuses. This suggests that the existing overcurrent protection is sufficient for the new electrical work and that no upgrades are required. However, it is important to verify that the existing overcurrent protection is properly sized and functioning correctly. Fifthly, potential issues. Potential issues that may arise include the extent of the framing work, the location and type of smoke detectors required, and the adequacy of the existing overcurrent protection. It is important to address these issues proactively to avoid delays and complications. Sixthly, consulting with the inspector. Before starting any work, schedule an appointment with the electrical inspector to discuss the permit and any potential issues. This will allow you to clarify any questions and ensure that you are in compliance with all requirements. Seventhly, documentation. Keep a detailed record of all work performed, including wiring diagrams, equipment specifications, and inspection reports. This documentation can be helpful in troubleshooting problems and demonstrating compliance with code requirements. Eighthly, communication with the GC. Maintain open communication with the GC throughout the construction process. This will help to ensure that everyone is on the same page and that any issues are addressed promptly. Ninthly, safety. Always prioritize safety when performing electrical work. Follow all applicable safety procedures and use appropriate personal protective equipment. Tenthly, compliance. Ensure that all work complies with the building permit, the National Electrical Code, and any local regulations. This will help to avoid penalties and ensure the safety of the electrical installation. Navigating electrical inspections, especially with a Nitpicky inspector, requires a combination of technical knowledge, communication skills, and a thorough understanding of building permits and code requirements. By following these guidelines, you can increase your chances of a successful inspection and avoid unnecessary delays and expenses. Remember that the ultimate goal is to ensure the safety and compliance of the electrical installation.